Right, it is 1:05. I'm just going to do a couple quick announcements and then I'll get started. Is there anyone else joining us? Looks like we are a lucky 7 today. Wonderful. And anyone missed it can get the rebroadcast. Hi, my name is Kristen Culver. I am a Toastmaster, member of 2 clubs, the Power Hour Toastmasters in Sudbury and the Advanced Access Toastmasters in Brookline. They are helping me to improve my communication and leadership skills, and one of the things that I am doing in order to complete my training is this workshop. So you'll see Toastmasters logo on the slides. I'm not trying to promote or sell Toastmasters. It is simply to be aware that that is where I'm getting my training from. Should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me via the email I reached out with or private message on Facebook, or you can private chat here. This log gets saved, so please watch your language and be respectful of others. I am also recording this training for the few people who told me they could not attend but would still like to participate. If you have a problem with this, you can close your screen and mute your phone and just observe. You can watch the rebroadcast later. Or if you want to participate but maybe have some doubts or concerns, contact me afterwards and I will be working with a videographer to edit out, if need be, segments if that truly becomes the case. But I hope that this will be a fun experience for all of you and it won't be an issue. But I wanted to make sure I told you this was being recorded and to understand it's not being sold. It's only going to be rebroadcast on that Facebook event and probably in a secure link on YouTube so I can access it again and maybe email it to someone later. So this isn't getting broadcast into too many places, but anytime it's on the internet, it's considered public. That's all I have for the legal stuff. I'm just going to start with some of the boilerplate standard stuff that they usually have me share with you. One, you should have a workbook, and if you don't, I will try my best to relate to you what page and what the page says. And as we go through, there'll be a couple opportunities to work together in what we call a breakout room, and I will just randomly assign you into them. There'll also be an opportunity to chat with each other here, but we will want to take turns. Other than that, there may be a couple of times where I screen share and have my assistant Sandy take notes. That way, I'll be sending those notes along with the recording to you. That way you can match it up with the recording and the exercises. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. I know it's valuable, and I appreciate the support my fellow Toastmasters are giving me. I will be using a timer to keep me more or less on time. And hold on, I have to let somebody in. Just a second. Welcome. I'm gonna just mute anyone coming in and ask that everyone please take their seated and upright positions. That means you, Jim. I don't know what you're doing, but you can fix the ceiling fan later. He's in my club, it's okay, I know him. As a matter of fact, we've taken turns being officers in the same club. So if anybody is permitted to be teased, that would be him and me, respectively. Hi, Vicki. I know you came in a few seconds late, and Alan, I don't recall when you popped in, so I'll just say really quickly, this is being recorded. It is academic. It is not going to be sold or broadcast anywhere outside of the event, and a private YouTube link that I can then send to people who missed this event but still want to partake in the workshop. It may also be edited down so that it's only the raw components needed to follow along with the workbook. I will make sure I send along the notes that will be typed up by my helper, Sandy, during a couple of the exercises. And depending on people's comfort level, if they do not want their comments in the breakout rooms recorded, I don't even know if the breakout rooms get recorded. I think just the general session does, but I will check. I have someone who's going to go over the footage with me and edit out anything that's maybe not needed. So do not be concerned, but if you have questions or concerns, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm now going to begin. If anyone jumps in late, they'll just have to catch up. We're talking about management skills today, and a lot of that has to do with knowing what management is, or just make sure that we're on the same page of what we think management is. The definition, according to, hold on, we have a slide, if you'll give me a second here. and I minimized my tab. Pardon me just a second. And why isn't it going up? You're not seeing the slide I'm trying to share. No, you're not. Resume share. There we go. Aha. Thank you. Sorry, technical difficulties, but we'll get there. This is the slide I was going to read you the quote from. The manager has to create tomorrow to slough off yesterday and render obsolete what already exists and is known. This is Peter Drucker, who is a known management expert. And I will pause this again. Get back to our group. Managers are an important part of any organization. Our society depends on goods and services provided by organizations, and these individuals are the ones who help manage that. I would say that personally, having someone who is in a management position to guide me and give me instruction is always very helpful. And thank you, Vicki. I will make sure that the chat log is saved if someone wants to go back and get your contact information later. I will just continue where I left off. Each of us are influenced by the actions of managers. I was giving an example of myself. Our experiences could be from college or work. It could be within a social group or organization. Maybe you're a volunteer. Either way, the purpose of the presentation is to help you understand those skills and qualities required to be an effective manager. Once you've discovered these, you will be able to possess and maintain and improve your own management skills and allow you to take charge of various projects in your life, creating tomorrow, as Mr. Drucker says. All managers exist for a purpose: the guide, the organization, and influence its people to achieve objectives. This may involve producing a product to be sold. An example of a Toastmasters club, it's ensuring that members learn speaking and leadership skills. I'm now going to start our first exercise. Get it in early, right, folks? Our goal is going to be to establish a definition of management. You will want to take your workbook and turn to page 5. If you do not have a workbook, there's not a lot on there. You can just use a plain note paper. It'll be fine. So I want you to pretend you're a manager of a department of 10 people. How would you define your responsibilities as a manager? And I'm going to set a timer so we can kind of keep going here and not be delayed. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat box, but I'm going to have you to think your thoughts, take your notes, and then I'm going to have you share them with me either via chat or verbally. We'll try to figure this out, and my assistant will type those notes in. So while you're writing your notes, I'm going to bring up a screen share so my assistant can be ready to type down the responses. So you have a few minutes. Think about the question. Pretend you're a manager of a department of 10 people. How would you define your responsibilities as a manager? Just take a moment, maybe in a couple of sentences, and write your response. Their definition of management is the process in which a cooperative group directs actions of others towards common goals. Sounds very similar to what something Jim said. Coordination of resources through process of planning, organizing, literally some of the same words, directing and controlling to achieve the objectives. And again, I'm seeing with the third quote, coordination is going through all 3 quotes. It's talking about activities or the pursuits in which they can't be achieved by any one person. I think that's a big one, teamwork. I think also that was mentioned by Angela earlier, that we need to understand that no one person can do it together. This is why a manager is needed to kind of coordinate and facilitate this. So I'm going to lower hand, and pardon me, I've just got so many pieces of paper. That's the one challenge sometimes with these presentations is I myself have to be sure I didn't skip something important. I believe we literally roll right into exercise number 2. So what I will do is bring us back to another whiteboard, if you will. And I do have the, where did the chat box go? My bad. I minimized too many things here. The next exercise will be a few minutes as well. I'm going to reset my timer. And it asks, identify 4 major skills managers must know And this would be page 6 of your workbook. You may or may not have the workbook. If you do, wonderful. And it says to you, read the following story and answer the questions. And the questions below are, if you were John Smith, this made-up person, how would you gather information on management, and what skills do you think John would have to learn to be an effective manager? So what I'm supposed to do is give you, again, a few minutes to read the material, and then I will check in with you afterwards to see what you've answered, and we're going to have my assistant Sandy type them up. So I'm going to make sure everyone's muted for just a moment and allow you guys a few minutes to read the story and answer the question. So it talks about goal setting. That's one of the first things mentioned in that list of 4. Before we can achieve something, we have to know what it is we want to achieve. Now that might sound like a gimme, but sometimes you have to think about these things. It's not obvious to everybody. Pardon me, gotta stop that. It's not obvious to everyone that that is in fact the case. I've been trained in this in my business. I've been trained in this in prior jobs I've had. So to me, it's second nature. I will not assume, so I'm going to read you a little so you understand what they're coming from. We have to be actually able to see the goal to help us accomplish it. And there's actually some science behind that. But for example, boxing champion Sugar Ray Leonard visualizes each of his fights weeks before the actual bout. And this is probably the case with a lot of athletes, not just boxers. In his mind, he sees how the fight takes place, how he plans to attack his opponent. Maybe he's studied his opponent on video and knows his weaknesses or certain moves that they tend to use so he can anticipate a good counter. 2 weeks before a title fight, Sugar Ray saw himself being knocked to the canvas but getting back up to win. Because of this vision, when tentatively in the early rounds of a fight, it says here, the 4th round, he was actually knocked down by a sweeping right hook. It's like one of these things that you see in the movies. In the post interview, he explained that the knockdown was the turning point in the fight. But with the vision he had in his mind, he came back in the 9th round and win the match. He saw his goal and fought to achieve it. Goals don't have to be as grand as winning a boxing title, but they need to be statements with results that you hope to achieve. For example, a goal might be to develop and implement by January 1st manual designed to orient new employees at our company that cost does not exceed $3,000. Now, that sounds pretty specific to me. And the goal has certain characteristics. Now, this slide I'll share with you in a second, if it'll let me. Here we go. I forgot to show you this slide, my bad. These were the 4 skills. I'm jumping ahead because I know what's coming up next, and this is one of my favorites. So I'm going to minimize the grid for a second for myself so I can see the slide well. And if you cannot see the slide, please indicate. I can make it bigger. I believe you may have heard this before, but in case you haven't, it starts with to, followed by a verb, meaning an action. It gives a desired result, something specific. It includes a target date, a deadline, if you will. It is measurable. It has a quantity to it. It is not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a term like someday or someone or something or anytime. It's not like that. It has to be something quantifiable or countable or measurable. And in this case, it gives a cost. I've heard the phrase a SMART goal. So I'm going to apply that here for a second. And that's simply because I feel like I've trained on that before. And I don't know if you can see me adding the speaker notes, but I'm going to add this in to remind me to add this to our lecture notes. But SMART means specific, measurable, so the same words. I can't spell, but I will fix that later. Actionable, meaning you can take action on it. Some people say realistic, some people say resources. I'll say resources here because realistic isn't always, some goals are kind of scary and challenging outside the normal parameters and have a time limit or have a timeliness. So basically it's the same thing. You need to have something that is specific. I want to lose 25 pounds. Measurable. You'll know because you can step on the scale and see the 25 pounds are gone. Actionable. Well, you have to have a plan, some kind of plan of attack. What am I going to do? Drink more water, eat more vegetables, cut out the coffee and soda, maybe the sugar, have less carbs, whatever. And then resources. Well, I have this book here. I have water being delivered to my house. I'm going to use Instacart and have vegetables delivered so there's no excuse. And a time limit. If you give yourself a time limit of 3 months, then you know whether you've reached your goal or not. Otherwise, you could potentially, pardon me, that's the timer, put it off forever and never really reach your goal. So I put that in the little notes, and I will make sure that gets included later on in the actual lecture. Another slide right after this, you may not see it until I transition to it here. The characteristics of a goal, they relate to needs, hopes, wants, and desires. What that means is it's driven by something more than a number. When people are passionate about what they want to accomplish, they are more likely to get it done. You have a fundraising goal for your favorite charity, and I'll tell you right now, you're more likely to reach your goal. If you're just selling widgets to sell widgets, but there's no real reason behind it, people aren't going to be too excited about buying those widgets or you selling them, because why are you doing it? I'm jumping ahead of the line here. Realistic, understandable, achievable. Again, if people can understand what your goal is, they're more likely to be on board. In this case, maybe it's your team. The what, when, and not why, how. I think knowing why is important. I am going to counter the slide, but the reason I say that is I need to know the purpose. What, of course, is important because you have to figure out what your goal is. When is, again, that time limit. How, again, I'm not sure why it's saying not why and how, because honestly, you need to figure out how. You may not know everything, but you need to have your first step and then your next best step. You have to have something to start. If you are waiting till everything lines up perfectly, like let's say you were going to go to work when all the lights are green at the right time so you could go straight to work without stopping, I'll tell you right now, traffic control would never let that happen. You would never make it to work. You would be fired. So with that analogy, you can't just wait till the conditions are perfect. I mean, if you're launching a spaceship into orbit, you kind of have to wait till the conditions are ideal, but they're never truly perfect. And again, the last thing on this slide, they say is communicated verbally and in writing. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to write your goal down, because I personally experienced this. If you don't, you start to forget the details. They can get fudged with, if you will. I won't use bad language, but they can get messed with. And eventually you lose that specificity, you lose your deadline, and you lose the purpose driving you behind it. It becomes just this thing, this dream that you hope might happen. And that is not the point here. Along those same lines, it says that they need to be agreed upon. It isn't saying that in the slide, but I think that's true. Well, actually it does at the very bottom part, verbally communicated, but it should also be agreed upon, meaning if you are trying to improve your team's production of widgets by a certain percentage, you have to understand that the rest of the team needs to be on board with that. If they go, oh my gosh, there is no way we're going to reach that level, maybe you have to compromise. Instead of 5%, it's 2.5%. If as you're going along, you get ahead of target, you might push the goal up to 5%. But if you realize you set it at 5 and you're feeling miserably at the halfway mark because you set a time limit, now you run into this problem where you're struggling to catch up. Morale goes down the tubes, everybody's frustrated, and it ends up badly. And guess who gets blamed? The manager. You don't want to be in that situation, do you? That is why I would strongly suggest you want to write your goal down and get some kind of a general consensus. I believe we are ready for our next exercise. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. It tells me to let you know that because your goal has to be specific, you need to describe the details. So on page 7, get my corresponding page, there is a fill in the blank. Do you remember these from grade school? It's not quite a Mad Lib. But you might hear some of these phrases I'll be reading, and you want to be filling those in as we go. So if you give me a second here, it wants me to ask you, List 3 personal or job-related goals, making sure each satisfy the characteristics discussed. So that is on the bottom half of the page if you're looking at it. And on the upper part is actually, it looks like the fill in the blank was sort of as I was reading one of the last slides. So if I need to, I can go back to read you that again if necessary. But right now it's asking you to write down 3 particular goals, making sure you use those characteristics. And I can put the slides back up, but that would be helpful. And then I'm going to have 1 or 2 of you state your goal to us so that we can kind of see it in the format it was recommended. And I would ask that the group be fair and open-minded in evaluating the goal and seeing if it really does meet the criteria I just read about. So I will go back, just going to reset that little timer, keep me timely. It basically agrees that managers have to have the ability to set these goals, inspire others to achieve them, and one of the more important aspects of their job, actually. If a manager can't accomplish this, it's going to be really difficult for them to effectively fulfill their other responsibilities. Each management task relies on setting the goal, which is the first step in developing your skills. Sometimes you have to start at the beginning. One of the subtopics along goal setting we talked about was the planning. Once your goal's been set, phrase I love to use, an action plan must be developed to successfully achieve these objectives. And give me just a second. I'm trying to not have too many windows open. I have a slide to share, if you bear with me a moment. This would be this guy here. And I, again, have way too many of these things going on right now. Planning, as the slide says, by Kuntz and O'Donnell, is deciding in advance what you hope to do, how you will do it, when to do it, and who is to do it. So again, it's what, how, when, and who. I don't know if that's going to come up on the next exercise or not, so I'll keep that in mind if we need to go back to the slide. This is important when we're planning. You have to do things step by step. It's nothing more than a way to achieve, like a map, if you will. When you want to go somewhere you've never been before, usually you look it up, or at least get the address. Maybe you ask somebody who's been there before who can give you landmarks or suggestions on the best way to get there. You don't just get in the car and drive and hope you might happen to show up. I mean, I hope you don't. If you do, wow, that's amazing. I don't know how that works. So much like a roadmap, your plan is useless if it isn't in front of you. So you can have a plan, but if you leave it at home or you don't look at it, you don't refer to it in any manner, shape, or form, it's not much of, it was a waste of time, basically. So a budget is an example of a plan for financial resources to achieve goals. Unless it's in writing, though, it's going to be challenging to remember. I don't know about you, but just trying to do my monthly budget to pay my bills, things fluctuate. It's not always the exact same things every month. And income can sometimes fluctuate. So you need to know what's coming in, what needs to be paid out, how much is going to be left, when things are due. It's never just a simple, I have money, I give money, I'm all set. I mean, some bills might be automatically paid or deducted out of an account, but you had to set that up. You had to think about it. You had to know about it. It's not as automatic as it sounds. Going forward, it talks about planning makes managers more future oriented. They have to think ahead. They're forced to look beyond their everyday activities and project what will happen in the future. And I know before we got to January, all my friends were talking about, oh my gosh, it's 2020. We're going to have 2020 vision. We're going to look forward. We're going to think ahead. We're going to have great ideas. Then we had this whole health crisis happen and our mindset has been shifted. But honestly, I'm thinking beyond this point. I'm thinking beyond whatever phase is the last phase. And I'm thinking about what I want to be accomplishing and where I want to be, partly because it's something positive I can focus on, and partly because that's how I was trained to deal with disappointment. Well, that didn't work. How do I make it work the next time? Look at my plan. Where did I go wrong? If I didn't have a plan, I wouldn't know and I wouldn't be able to correct it, and I'd repeat myself and I'd continue to make the same mistake. Planning enables managers to coordinate their decisions. Decisions shouldn't be made without considering their effects. That's going to get mentioned a little later on as well. Planning reinforces the goal. I know that sounds kind of weird, but when you think about it, it does kind of make sense. Planning puts your goal in front of you, like a carrot in front of a donkey and a cart, the old analogy. And since the goal is their starting point, managers generally know that they have to know ahead of time what you're trying to achieve. So it's kind of redundant from what I said earlier, but you notice this is just trying to reinforce things. Next slide. Make sure I'm on the right one. Here we go, the planning process. I don't know if, yes, this is in your workbook. You might want to take a peek before we get to the exercise. On page 8, it's kind of a fill in the blank that corresponds to the slide, so you might want to take notes. I'm going to read, and you can fill in the blanks as we go. Determining goals. As discussed earlier, a goal is clearly written statement, communicates what's happening and when it'll happen. It's based on a study of the existing situation as it relates to you and your organization. So the next thing, establish strategies. Identify how you're going to achieve your goal. List specific steps that must be taken to move you forward. What must be done? The next thing is set a timetable. Again, you're noticing this is a repeat of what we heard earlier. Priorities and scheduling are critical to planning. Making a list of tasks according to their priority or specific deadlines. Establish the deadlines for completion. If something has to happen first and then something else has to happen second, you can't really reverse their order. If you know that you need to start the ball rolling for a fundraiser, but you also have to do 3 or 4 other small tasks while that's going on in the background, you may be doing things simultaneously. That term is called multitasking. But the idea is that you do need to have a timetable to know when things should be finishing, or to when to stop to assess how you're doing and if you are on target of your goal. Assigning responsibilities. That is where you're delegating tasks to your work team. That's something I had so much trouble with my first time around as a president of a club. I remember being in a Girl Scout troop and being sort of like the troop leader's assistant. I think it was the secretary or something, and I had to make sure handouts were handed out and that the treasurer got the dues collected for every couple of months and so forth. I was just there to kind of make sure everything ran smoothly. Basically a manager without realizing it at that time. And as an adult, the same things apply. You delegate the task to your team, and it's important to think about matching your task to the person who's best suited for it. And they give an example. If one task is to give a presentation to other company officials, and assign someone who's skilled in preparing and giving presentations. You don't give it to the rookie who's never done it, is really nervous, and is going to faint if they try to give a presentation. You send them to Toastmasters instead so they can figure out how to give a presentation. And when they're better, then they can give the presentation. But you really try to find your person who's best suited. And just to throw in a little sci-fi reference, you would never ask, I don't know, the Dr. McCoy of the Starship Enterprise to fix the engines. You would ask engineer Scotty, to fix the engines because he knows how to. That is what he's good at. The doctor, on the other hand, might fix an injured person who's come back from a mission and needs to be stitched up. You wouldn't ask the engineer to do that. So that's kind of an example in Kristen language of what I think of as assigning a responsibility to an appropriate person if you're going to delegate a task. We'll go into a little more detail in just a minute. Number 5 talks about anticipating obstacles. You can't always see what's coming, but you know, there's that saying about Murphy's Law, if anything can go wrong, it will, and at the most inconvenient moment, there are going to be obstacles. It is gonna happen. It is life. It is just out of our hands. It's how you deal with those obstacles. And knowing in advance that they could happen, knowing which ones are likely to happen, or anticipating maybe not every possible thing that can go wrong, but the ones that are more likely to go wrong, that's probably enough to get you started. And they talk about anticipating a problem and turning them into a possibility. It sounds a lot like that question you get at an interview of a job, where they say, tell me about a time when you made a mistake. What did you learn from it and how did you overcome it? Like, they want to know if you're able to turn your head around and go, well, you know, I can't do that again. But you know, next time I'm going to do something else instead. That's what they want to see. They want to see that your mind is flexible enough. A manager has to be able to do mental gymnastics. It is not for the faint of heart, but that's why they get paid a little more. That's why they get a fancy title, because they have those additional responsibilities. It's not hard. It's just a little extra. You have to think a little more, which is not really a bad thing. You're at a workshop because you think. You want to do something more, you want to get better at something. So I applaud you because you're in the right mindset right there. Finally, modify as necessary. Guess what? I just said it a minute ago. You got to be flexible. Things are going to change on you. You're going to do a photo shoot outside. It's a beautiful day, but you live in New England. You already know what I'm going to say next. Wait a minute, because in about 15 minutes, a storm front's going to come through and it's going to rain, and you're going to have everybody in the photo shoot get inside or under cover. You're going to have to cover the gear, make sure no one gets electrocuted, and you're going to figure out, can we wait this out and continue to take photos on the wet ground, or do we need to reschedule this shoot? Do we have an alternative location that we can do inside? Can we find one right now? Did we plan ahead for this? Did we have an inside venue all along because we didn't trust New England weather? I mean, that's an example of, oftentimes I see people in the Boston Common getting their photos taken for a wedding party or engagement photos. My husband and I did that. We ran around with a photographer like we were celebrities being chased by paparazzi, and we had our photos done, and we had to time it so that it was close to sunset for that lovely afternoon lighting. But the important thing was, what if it rained? What if there was an event going on and where we wanted to take our photos was not going to be available? What if there was a fire and half the blocks that we wanted to go take beautiful pictures in front of were blocked off by fire trucks? Anything could have happened, but that photographer had to think like a manager and have in her head ideas of where she could take photos of us in case something went wrong. And I'll tell you, you can't tell that we took photos in like 5 different locations all around the Common. It looked like it was planned. And I know Brian and I were not anticipating some of these spots, but she said, oh, trust me, this is a good one. We will never know if she was winging it, but I'll tell you right now, looking back, I bet she did, because there were some events going on that we had to work around. And again, you modify accordingly. You don't have to stop. You don't have to give up. You don't have to throw your hands in the air. You just, pardon me, there's my timer, perfect timing too. You just have to understand that you need to be able to, what the word is, I think, is pivot or shift, depending on which term you like better. But those are very trendy right now. You can hashtag that and look in Twitter and look on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll see that there are motivational quotes, images, and people who give like little blurbs on YouTube about having a shift or being able to pivot, because you cannot be locked into one thing and one thing only. It ends up not working out very well for you or your team, and that can be very frustrating. I think I have 1 or 2 more things to say, real brief. Looking to see if there's another slide. Pardon me a second here. Not yet. I'm going to stop sharing this. Hopefully you got your little notes in on page 8. And it tells me here, creating an obligation for your subordinate to perform the assigned duties. That sounds kind of harsh, but I think what they're trying to say is accountability. That's a term I like to use a lot. So you've assigned your task to the individual who is best skilled to do said task. And in order to be sure that you know that you've given the goal to the right person or the task to the right person, then it will get done and will fit in all little pieces to the overall grand scheme of the plan. You have to kind of guide them a little. It doesn't do any good to delegate a duty to someone who isn't going to do them. That would be the teenage son who doesn't really want to walk the dog or take out the garbage. He'd rather play on his Xbox or listen to music, do a little TikTok video, and then in the end, the garbage doesn't get taken out and the dog's sitting there looking like he's going to explode because he really has to go out. Hold on just a second, letting another member in. Hi, Mark. Glad you could make it. I'm going to just make sure you're muted and we'll continue where we left off. We're in the end of section 3. In your workbook, it would be page, well, kind of page 7-ish, a little bit onto page 8. But I was explaining how accountability is necessary to make sure your team is in fact doing what they basically agreed to or that you assigned to them. Some people are uncomfortable making decisions because they have lack of motivation, and you got to get that person to agree to accept that responsibility. That does not mean cajoling or embarrassing or forcing them. That is not a good manager. It's important to remember that although you delegate it, you can't escape responsibility, because the old saying, the buck stops here, does apply. And I will point out that accountability applies to you as well, not just your team. So you're accountable for the consequences of your team members and their decisions. Suppose you were to delegate I think they're giving an example here, to a line supervisor the authority to make certain decisions, and that supervisor makes a poor decision that results in profit loss. Okay, that's fancy tech talk for he didn't do his job, you guys lost money. You have to be responsible for the fact that you chose that person to do that task and they did not pull through. Your supervisors would not be impressed if you made lots of explanations or excuses as to why that happened, because that's not going to solve the problem at all. I had mentioned earlier, I looked at the time, it's 2 o'clock. We started about 5 minutes late. I'm going to allow for a quick 5-minute, what I call bio break or bathroom break, because I know I need one. I'm going to leave this playing, but I'm going to close my screen and mute my microphone so that we don't have to leave and come back in. I will come back and keep an eye on the screen to make sure everyone else gets back. But if you want to just set yourself your own little 5-minute timer, great. If you can't, I will do my best to kind of get your attention. That I was thinking of that. Yes, Angela. I'm going to pause the recording because there's obviously no point in recording nothing. And we will be back in about 5 minutes. So I'll see you shortly. I'm going to pick up where I left off. I realize now I did get a teensy bit ahead on the slides, but it's okay. We're just going to recap them again. We're starting on exercise 4. If you're following along in the workbook, you will want to be on pages 8 and 9. And what they ask is for me to read you the following. You're going to instruct how you would plan to achieve the goals you listed earlier in exercise 2. That was back on page 6. I know Jim and Angela were nice enough to voice them out loud, and a couple people came in late, so they may not have written a goal. And it basically asked for some kind of a goal that you would, I think that was actually exercise 3, not 2. The goals you listed were personal or job-related goals, and that was actually page 7. So I think that might be a typo in my book. My apologies. There were some suggested steps back in exercise 2. That might be what it's referring to, that you would use. Again, I think it is actually exercise 3. Just bear with me. I'm kind of looking back at my copy of your workbook. So they want me to have you think about how you would achieve your goal. Meaning you've got to create a little plan now. And following the process and the sheet here, remember we talked on the slide about determining, establishing, setting, assigning, anticipating, and modifying. I'll bring that slide up in a moment so you have it handy. And of course, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to kind of create your plan. And then after that, we're going to talk briefly, maybe 1 or 2 people, 3 or 4 if they're feeling bold, to share their plan for their goal with the rest of us. And then we'd like some feedback about that to see if their plans are in fact following the structure on target and make sense. So I'm going to start the timer and have you guys look at that while I pull up the slide again for you. I left it there, should still be there, and you should be able to still see it. I managed to get it in presentation mode, so it's a little bigger now. If you have questions, please raise your hand or comment to me in the chat box. I will have the chat window available to see comments coming in if you get questions or stuck. There's too many little windows open, so bear with me a moment. Okay. Oop, sorry about that. Too many things on my screen. Did not mean to advance that. Do you need more time to complete your plan, or are you guys ready to go into the discussion part? Okay, need another minute. Who would like to go first, sharing with us their plan for their goal?
I'll go.
Excellent.
So one of my goals, the other one that I didn't tell you about, was to finish reading 4 books I started last year and in the first quarter by Labor Day. So I have one that I call the Red Book because it's a red cover. So my plan is to work on, so I'm going to schedule some personal reading time because I stink at that. In June, I'm going to focus on the Red Book and promptings, which I'm like maybe 30 pages left in the promptings book. In July, I'm going to pick 2 other books to focus on, including the second shortest left to finish. Not the shortest, but I want to make sure it's the second shortest. And then I'm just going to read away with those last 2 books in July and August.
Okay. And let's see, does anyone else want to chime in with their plan for their goal? I know, Jim, you mentioned you had a goal and you probably did go into your plan a little bit in the process, but if you could kind of share with us a little more, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, I'd be glad to give you a quick little summary of what I came up with. So the goal is to make sure my friend gets elected to be a state representative in District 13 of Middlesex County. And the strategies that we're coming up with is, 1, to identify people who are capable of helping. They can donate money. We have actually gained access to software that can identify demographics like education, income, wealth, anything that will indicate that they like to give and donate in large amounts to those they choose to. The other strategy is to identify people in the area, in the district, who can help us out. And we have done so. We have 50 volunteers at this point. And the timetable is set to be in 4 phases. Each phase determines what we need to do. So we're in the get to know the candidate phase. So we're having people post on social media. We're sending out emails. We're sending out postcards. We'll be knocking on doors in about a week or 2 as soon as COVID-19 seems to be under mostly controlled circumstances without scaring people. And we're continuing to make phone calls. Now, the responsibilities will be assigned to those whose skill or whose willingness to do certain tasks has been identified by them and by the people that are managing them. The obstacles we could run into are, 1, there's always a need for money. So we have to identify the people that are able to give and willing to give in large enough amounts to keep the campaign rocking and rolling. And the other obstacle, of course, is the other candidate, who, of course, will be doing things to make my candidate look bad. And we, of course, must counter that in a very take the high road sort of way. The 6th step here in the planning process, modify as necessary. As I said, depending on what obstacles we run into from the other candidate as well as specific expenses we may need to raise money for more quickly, we will come up with ways of identifying ways of, people that we can get bigger contributions and more contributions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Wow, you went right through the bullet points. I have very little critique for you. I think for me, the thing that I feel is needs to be a little more specific would be the timetable. I know you said your deadline is November 3rd, but is there a certain time that she needs to make sure, for example, is she on the ballot? I know it's a she, let me just say that much. Is there a specific date that she needs to be officially on the ballot? Does she have the number of signatures she needs, et cetera? Is that all done?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, that's
all
all
right. So
done.
we're at the point where she's literally, like you said, fundraising, and you know the financial goal. Do you have a deadline for yourself or her of when you want to reach that financial goal? I might have missed that. Did you mention that?
Well, it's kind of a rolling type of goal
But
because
you have like more than one, maybe?
yeah, so she knows how much money on average each week that she needs to raise. And so if we don't meet the goal one week, we have to make up for it in the next week or two to keep things moving.
So
And then
the overall number needs to be met, and you have like mini goals as to when you would like to reach each benchmark to make sure you stay on target. I think I understand. Okay, thank you for clarifying. Does anyone else want to chime in with comments on either Jim or Angela's plan, specifically based on the 6 criteria we have here on the screen? I know Veronica had chimed in before. I don't know if Sandy or is it Alan or Mark wants to chime in. Please feel free to do so. Just unmute.
I love feedback.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a stigma attached to it sometimes. I feel like a lot of people I personally have encountered think it's a criticism when it's simply information. And it's a matter of how you interpret as to whether or not it's meant intentionally to be harmful or helpful. All right, well, I'm going to move on then to one of my next slides, and then another brief moment where I get to ask a couple of quick questions. And I'm just gonna see, I don't think I need to change the slide. I think I was saying earlier, a step in the management process is to implement your plans, putting them into effect. This makes sure all your team members, not just the supervisors, understand and accept the goals are, they're on board. I think that's the term that people like to use. Know their roles and are motivated. We'll talk about motivation in a minute, but I laugh because it's like, that's not easy. That actually can be very hard, but we're not going to try to scare you in this workshop. For your team to be successful, everyone must be able to visualize and understand the goal and its importance, as do you. Discussing your goal with your team individually to help them, to get their input. So you wouldn't just say to everybody and go, everyone in, and then hope that they all raise their hands. You would want to go around individually to your team members to say, this is what we're doing. This is what I expect of you. All right, can I rely on you to step it up and do what you need to do by this date, blah, blah, all the details. That is kind of what I believe that phrase is talking about. So you would make sure they know what's expected of them, where their efforts fit in, like what puzzle piece do they belong to in the whole grand scheme of things, and who can they go to help for information decisions? Because if they are reporting to you or someone else, it probably means they're not authorized to make certain decisions or do certain things without approval. So you don't put them in a situation where they have to do a job that they're not authorized to, and then they're stuck, and then you don't hit your desired result because they couldn't move forward. So you have to be, again, forward thinking and aware of this. On those same notes, we're going to move on to our next visual. Bear with me a second. I think you can still see all that. I don't think you're seeing all my other stuff here. So this is what we just talked about a second ago. You assigning a specific duty, you're giving them appropriate authority, and if they aren't authorized, well, then you have to find someone else who is. Think about that for a minute. If you work for a government or for some other organization that has certain requirements of clearance. As a science major, I knew that I would work in labs that required certain medical training or certification, possibly even depending on the level of sensitivity of the information. I might have to sign documentation that says I will not discuss this outside of the lab. I had to be understanding that if I were to break any of those rules, I would lose the permissions and authority I had to work there. That was a big deal. So understanding, like in science fiction, I love science fiction, so I like to go back to it. You're watching a show, and there's a commanding officer, and then there's someone who's a lower ranking officer. And of course, what happens is somebody above tells this person below, go do this. And he goes, I'm not cleared for that task. I only have a level 3 clearance. That's a level 10 thing. And then the person goes, fine, I'll have to authorize you for level 5 clearance so that you can do this task. What he's doing is he's giving that person authority to do something that they weren't earlier permitted to do. Maybe because now they're more responsible, or they have to deal with equipment or sensitive data that they weren't able to access before because they weren't authorized to. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's not necessarily something where you're lording authority over someone else. It might be a technical level of authority or certification. Now we want to talk about motivating our team members. One of the challenges, and I say this with a full heart, is to influence your team members to want to do their task. You technically can't motivate them, and it even says in one of the slides, motivation does come from within, but you can inspire them, you can get them enthusiastic, and I feel personally that is what we think of when we say motivation. Now it asks me to ask you guys what you think motivation is. And I noticed there's this button here that asks a question and lets you fill out an answer. I've never tried it before, so just for the fun of it, I'm going to, if it'll let me. It's basically saying launch a poll. I was hoping it would work. It does not look like I did it right. You know what? We'll just skip that. Stop screen share for just a second, and I'm just gonna open this up to a general chat. What do you think in your mind and your heart motivation is? And I will just do my best, and my assistant will also, to copy down onto scrap paper your responses, and I will make sure I add that to the lecture notes, because I'm not going to create another Word doc just for all of a few seconds. And I'm trying to figure out what exercise I want to exercise for. So if anyone wants to start, I'd like to hear your thoughts, a very brief thoughts on what you consider motivation. Along those lines, they tell me to share with you, and I more or less agree with this. Motivation's the inner force that moves us to achieve our goals. So I guess it was looking for a more dictionary type definition, like, Alex, what is motivation? Inner force that moves us to achieve our goals, you know, for 200 or whatever. I think because the key I just said a second ago, it's inside of the person. You're trying to stimulate that somehow. So along those lines, they say level of performance is a result of ability combined with motivation. And ability is knowledge, skills, experience that they bring to the task. If that person doesn't have that ability or is unwilling to do it, they're probably not going to function to their expectations. I think we talked about it earlier. You don't ask the engineer to do surgery, and you don't ask the doctor to fix the engine. Just saying. Potential motivation is a result of confidence combined with trust and valued reward. So we talked about rewards earlier. Well, there you go. It's brought up again. Confidence, I think, comes from experience. And it says here, team members begin to become motivated when they have knowledge, skill, and experience that gives them the confidence to tackle a task. So if I were to paraphrase that, doing something and being successful makes them feel confident in their ability to do the task. Therefore, they will become more motivated to do the task again because they know they can do it and don't have to worry if they're going to fall flat on their face. Like, that's kind of how I'd interpret that. So the potential is better when they're able to do the task with confidence. The reward or benefit could be, as I think both Sandy, Jim, and Angela said, recognition. It could be some benefit, like you joked about a party. Yeah, designated driver would definitely be necessary for that kind of party. Personal development, promotion. For example, why am I doing a 3-hour workshop on a beautiful Saturday afternoon? I am motivated to complete my training because it allows me to have the designation of something fancy, woohoo, called Distinguished Toastmaster. Very few people ever reach this point. I think Angela has reached it, and I think Jim is on track too. I don't know if anyone else is a Toastmaster or is thinking about it. I know Sandy's a member of my club, so she's technically a Toastmaster. but she's starting out. So I'm not even gonna ask that question because that wouldn't be fair to her. But maybe one day, you never know. But it would be like graduating high school. I like to think most people want to get a GED or graduate high school. Therefore, they're motivated to get through the classes no matter how boring they are because they want to finish. They want to leave. They want to get that diploma so they can go work or go to college or whatever. The motivation, the carrot before the donkey, as I joked about before, that's really more an incentive or reward. The motivation is, how badly do you want it? Are you willing to do it? Are you willing to make yourself do it? Are you willing to overcome your fear to do it? Motivation is not just a teeny tiny word in a dictionary. There's so much oomph behind it. It's really hard for me personally to just leave it like Jim. He needed to go on 5 sentences. So do I. I feel like that's important to understand that people toss that word around. I want to be a motivational speaker. I think that's on my LinkedIn. I do. But what I'm really wanting to be is an influential person who brings out the motivation in others. But that is way too wordy and does not fit on a name tag, right? Anyway, enough about me. We're going to go back to slides for just a second, and that's my timer reminding me to stop and go to the next slide. So I believe, here we are. Make sure we're on how to delegate, implementing. So we said putting plans into effect. Well, that was kind of silly. I would have just put that out earlier. Team members need to know what's expected of them. I think we said this about 2 bullet points ago, where their effort will fit and to whom they can go for help and information. So I'm buzzing through a few of these slides because it seems like they're just a bit redundant. You're getting copies of these, don't worry. You'll be able to piece it back together later. I think we were down here, and I'll leave it here for now. Recognizing positive behavior should be continual and not just when the goal is achieved. I agree. If you wait till the end, they will lose motivation somewhere in between. It's like a marathon. It's a long run. You know, the one they do here in Boston, usually in the spring, but it's going to be in the fall this year, unless they totally canceled it. I don't remember. Either way, oh, it's been totally ixnayed. Oh, that's a shame. But long story short, it's a 26-mile run. You are not going to be moving at the same pace at mile 1 as you are at mile 26. And in between, they have something called Heartbreak Hill. It's the point when a lot of runners crash and give up. Their body is done, their heart and their mind is done. And any runner, and I know Mark, you used to jog. I don't know if you still do. I don't know if you do competitive running anymore. And Angela, I know you jog. Jim, I know you do other crazy stuff. So maybe this will, you don't? I thought you did some kind of running. My bad. But I know we all have longer term goals that we lose motivation during. And sometimes you got to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and kind of keep going. Hold on just a second. I want to make sure I'm not missing a comment. Walking and biking. Thank you. Well, similar, you have a distance you're traveling. Maybe you're pushing yourself to go a little more, a little faster, changing the course. You probably change it up a little because if you just did the same flat track all the time and you didn't do anything to make it more interesting, you probably get bored. I know that a lot of people, they get into this kind of zone to get through the hard, boring stuff so that they come out the other end and they finish the long runs or the long cycles or whatever it is. So recognizing throughout, not just at the end, I agree is a great idea. It's probably why all these years when I was a kid, my teachers would put a star on every spelling test I got 100 on throughout the year so that I didn't wait for one sticker at the end of the year, because trust me, that wouldn't have excited me, and I'm sure it wouldn't have excited you either. Here they have an example. IBM, a leading computer corporation. That tells you how old this booklet is. Anyway, fill in the blank with your favorite company. Authorizes managers to recognize team members through its Dinner for Two program. When a manager is pleased with a team member's performance, he or she may give that person a check saying, "You've done a good job, take your spouse out to dinner." Wow, that is very outdated, but I appreciate the sentiment. To be more effective, I should have just skipped the example. Reinforcement should be specific and timely. Let the members know what exactly they're doing right as soon as you see them doing it. This is the basic premise of Mr. Ken Blanchard and Spencer Johnson, who in their book, The 1 Minute Manager, explained to motivate positive performance. So I'm about to flip to a new slide, but I just want one comment before that. Has anyone ever trained a pet? Behavioral, okay, yes. You know, when they do something wrong, you do something immediately to let them know they've done something wrong, like they peed on the carpet, or worse, they destroyed something. And what do? No, 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 bad dog, no biscuit, whatever. The point is, if you waited an hour till after you noticed it, that poor dog would not know why he's getting yelled at. And he would think you just hate him, or worse, he's horrible and a bad dog, and that's not the case. Same thing with your team members. If you wait 6 months to recognize something they did 6 months ago, they may not get why they're being recognized. Or at the same time, if you yell at them about something wrong they've done 6 months after the fact, they're going to be like, why are you bringing that up? Let bygones be bygones. We may have long and short-term memory, but let's face it, if you don't recognize with an attaboy, a thank you, or the appropriate behavior right away, the timing is all wrong and it really doesn't get received well. Humans, just like Pavlov with the dog, they respond to certain things. Maybe the dog salivates when he rings the bell because he trained it to. If we work harder when our boss gives us a pizza party at the end of the month because we hit our goals, and we're close to the end of the month and we're close to hitting our goal, and we go, well, I could stay an extra hour and get this done because, well, I don't want to have to pay for lunch tomorrow. And if we get this goal, we're going to get free lunch. Sometimes a reward in the right time, at the appropriate time, or the appropriate kind of reward will be very effective. And it doesn't even have to be expensive. I know, we joke, in my industry, I'm in a direct sales industry. My director, if she were raffling off a rubber band as a prize, I would want to win it because my director gives out great rewards for our efforts. So every month she puts up a poster with all these cute little things you could win. And if you're the kind of person who likes winning cute little things, you're going to pick the thing on the poster that you want. You're going to circle it. You're going to put the date on it. And you're going to do what you can to hit the mark to earn that cute little prize because you're good at motivating yourself. But if you have someone who isn't good at motivating themselves, but you know they will respond to a reward, you got to know what's important to them. And that's a whole nother discussion. If someone wants to talk, I can always bring a friend in who's a sales psychologist on the personality styles and how to talk in the language that best suits them to get them to want to do business with you or what have you. Again, motivation from within, but if they don't feel like you're on the same wavelength with them, they will not react or interact. I think the same thing applies with team members as it does with customers. If you're in any kind of a sales business or recruitment business or something that requires you to bring on board new people periodically, you need to motivate them, give them some call to action. In this case, you're the supervisor or the manager, so you're telling them, we need to get this done. It needs to be done then. And if you do, by this date, we're going to give you this. I think that's the intent they have here. So you had to tell them up front what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, praise them right away. And this is where I'm going to click the next slide as I'm talking so you can see that. While I went too far, my bad. And this does not look right. Pardon me a moment. I think I just skipped ahead. Yes, this looks right. My bad. The slides are not corresponding as I thought. I forgot there's 2 extra slides at the beginning. Tell people up front you're going to let them know how they're doing. Praise them right away when they do good. Switching to another sheet of paper here. There's a couple of them here. You're going to, my lines are much longer than the ones on the slide, so bear with me. What they did right. Tell people how good you feel about what they did and how their performance helps the organization. So this is one of those, I feel you're working really hard and I appreciate how much effort you're putting in. That's what they're talking about when they say how you feel. You're not telling them, I hate the way you leave tuna fish sandwich in the fridge on Thursdays and it stinks up the whole break room. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about specifically to the task at hand and how it helps the team and the department reach said goal. Stop talking for a moment so they can feel how good you feel. So I'm going to shut up for a second. See if you're paying attention. Because that's the one I got to work on. They need to get that when you said, I appreciate you, it was sincere. They need to feel that. Hence the remember to pause and let them take that in. I'm getting better at it. I will say that. But that's part of the reasons I do the training I do. It's to develop the skill and get to the point where when I'm working with my team, they know I'm really mean it when I say, you worked really hard. I saw what you did. I can't thank you enough. You were a key player. I appreciate your efforts. I want to give you a little something as a way of saying thank you. And then I shut up, let them react. And then at the appropriate time, kind of move forward and then encourage them to keep going. If you're not at the actual end of the project, if you're partway through. So it says, encourage them to do more of the same. I think for me, that's just a good manager is always continuing to encourage it. It's not like it ever stops. However, don't read into the touch them too much. I think what they're getting at is emotional. Touch their heart, not, if they do mean touch, they probably mean like a handshake or pat on the shoulder, but this day and age, I don't even think that's appropriate. So that's probably talking on an emotional level or a mental level, you know, reach them mentally and emotionally. I believe, are we on the next slide? We are not on the next slide. I'm trying not to get too far ahead of myself here. I'm gonna peek, yeah, not yet. I'm gonna stop the screen share. Basically, it has me rattle on, and I'm not gonna go too long-winded on this. Praise, reward, and reinforce, especially face-to-face. That's important. If you're only praising them in private and nobody ever knows that you're telling them they're doing good, and everyone else maybe has this preconceived idea that they're not pulling their weight, that can be a problem, especially, as I said, if you're a department head. So why I think companies like to have awards or employee of the month. Think about that for a minute. Haven't you ever looked to see when you have a friend at a company and you go, oh, I see your name's on the employee of the month board. I saw your picture. Congratulations. Great job. Now everyone else is going to praise them too. It's not just going to be you. I think that's very important. So when they talk about large amounts of recognition generally have a better effect than small amounts, I think what they're saying is continual as they go, not all at once and then nothing. So small amounts are great if it's throughout the process, but overall, you shouldn't just do it once, a little bit, or once a whole lot. It should be, pardon, just a second. Okay, she'll be back in a second, no big deal. Every once in a while, people mean to step out, it's totally okay, and you don't even have to apologize, all right? Just, as I said, just mute and turn off the camera so, you know, we're not watching whatever's going on in the background. That's perfectly fine. This is being recorded. You can always just make a mental note and jump back in where you left off. Sorry, I lost my place. I'm trying to regroup very quickly here. I think it was just saying, give recognition regularly through monthly meetings, performance appraisals, and so forth, annual banquets. When someone with authority uses recognition skillfully, those at the lower level tend to acquire the skill too. I think that's kind of neat, but also I think they appreciate you more because you're not just a title and you don't look down on them. You're looking at them as more almost like you're in the same field, the same family, same group. Forms of recognition you might use is just as important as when you recognize. So I think I mentioned that a minute ago. Members need to feel that they'll be rewarded appropriately for good performance and good behavior. Again, we were talking about training the dog or getting a teenager to take out the trash. You know, there needs to be something to get them to want to do that. And once they start to want to do it for their own reasons, that's when you really reward them because now you don't have to work so hard at it. Equally important is making sure the other team members are aware. And the examples they gave, they're just listing bullet points here. Delegating some authority, a pay raise, a promotion, a thank you, letters of praise, awards and certificates, a good job assessment, allowing members to be more creative and innovative. It just is recognizing that positive performance is an ingredient that's key in motivating your members. The job well done that will in the future be done again and again. I think the way I would have phrased it would have been, when what you appreciate appreciates. And I can't remember who I'm quoting, if it's Mr. Cody Bateman or Jay McHugh, but it's somebody from my friends on send out cards who I'm a happy customer of. And I know, Angela, you probably know because you use them too. I think you might even be a rep. Basically, it's this really cool automated system, free shameless plug, that makes greeting cards that look nice and are customizable, and you don't have to worry about having bad handwriting or not having a stamp or your printer dying, because that's all happened to me. It's not fun. And it's nice to know that it's got the right postage and you can send gift cards and brownies and all this doodads and gifts. It's just a really convenient system. But the guy who started the company, the whole point was people like to be appreciated. Don't make it hard. So his system is like point and click simple. You can use your phone, you can use your computer. It's very inexpensive. It's a great way for a manager to recognize their team. Now, again, I'm not trying to tell you something. I'm just saying as an example, my director loves to give gifts. That comes from, if you've done any training in the 5 love languages, her language is giving gifts. She loves to reward. So I'm always getting earrings, tumblers, purse, small purse, pens. Like I get excited when I get a pen that's all sparkly and cute with like a crown on top. I don't care. It's girly. I love it. I'm the one who gets excited about rubber bands. Remember that. So my director knows I'm motivated by cute little baubles. She loves to give gifts. This is a match made in heaven. Even though I must tell you, our personality styles are very different. But as a smart manager, she knows what I'm capable of. She knows what I'm willing to do and I'm capable of, willing to do, and knows how to throw the right incentive out in front of me to get me to do it. And in the process, challenges me to go and do a little more, try to be creative, do a little differently, what have you. Let's see, we've got a couple of comments here. Angela's talking about sending cards to anyone from anywhere. Yes, that is true, especially now where we're all stuck at home. That is so essential as far as the sending cards system. The Sandy made a comment about volunteering at her food pantry and was awarded with gift cards for all the volunteers, which I think is pretty slick and very smart. Again, that way you're sharing the wealth and it's not coming out of your pocket, but it's a way for you to share with the volunteers that you appreciate them and that the people who are in charge appreciate what you do and what they do. That's exactly the kind of thing I think they were getting at. I'm about to start exercise number 5. I know Veronica has not returned, or I can't tell if she has, but she didn't say she was back, so we're going to presume that she will pick up later. I would say you want to look at page 10 in your workbook. And don't worry, we're going to be coming up on another break soon. I am paying attention to the time. I noticed it's almost 3, so we're 2/3 of the way done. Yay! This one is going to be a little bit of group share. So again, when we're done thinking, we're going to get to talk a little. And I'm going to keep my piece of the worksheet in front of me because I don't like turning to the side. You guys can't see me when I do that. And I'm going to set my timer so we don't run long. I'm trying to really keep an eye on the time there, folks. It tells me, ask you guys, that's not grammatically correct, but I'm not caring right now. Ask each participant to select 1 or 2 people in the room. This is kind of weird because we're not physically in a room, who has said or done something during the session that the participant liked. Well, I'm going to borrow upon the fact that at least 3 of us know each other and another 2 of us know each other in a similar way, but not everyone. Keeping this in mind, they're asking me to ask you to tell the participant something positive. You're sharing praise to that person. And I'm not talking preachy praise, I'm talking complimentary. Using the guidelines discussed from that little Minute Manager slide, which I can bring up if you need me to. They can refer to pages 10 and 11 in the workbook, which I have in front of me, where it talks about make sure everyone knows what is blank of them, maybe great about them, where blank fits in relation to the goal. So let's just say this person is on your team to help you accomplish your goal and you're letting them know that they are one of the volunteers helping that person run for office. I'm using Jim as an example. And you know that they're going to be essential. And to whom they can go for help. Well, yourself and the person running for office are probably the resources. And then, of course, you got to remember that because you're supposed to be praising on that person, you need to think about telling them at the beginning what you're like awarding. You want to remember to, praise them right away, specifically what they've done or accomplished, and tell everyone else that they're kind of on board. Take a pause, let them kind of feel it. And then, of course, they say here, shake hands. They should have said that earlier instead of saying touch them. Yes, virtual handshaking. We've been doing that for a while now. So the exercise is basically on page 11, and it says, select the person. This is going to be challenging So I'm going to ask you guys to unmute to make this a little easier. And I'm going to try my best to suggest, based on who I know who knows each other. If you can try to wing this, that would be great. If you cannot, that's all right. And I know at least a couple of people here, so I'm going to be able to do the same. Coaching, of course, as you can imagine, is an important aspect of managing, because when the team members aren't functioning as they should be, your job is to coach them through. Unfortunately, sometimes it kind of becomes low priority because of other responsibilities that the manager might have. Many managers are reluctant to coach because they think of it as criticism. Remember I said earlier, criticism has feedback has a bad rap because it's thought of as criticism. They are two different things. They feel very uneasy about giving negative feedback, which is probably akin to criticism. But if it's done correctly, negative feedback can actually be very constructive and supportive. And I know my Toastmasters in the group who give good evaluations know what I'm talking about. Pardon me. Just a little dry mouth right now. So you're going to help the team member see their own strengths and weaknesses and help them build their strengths. You might hear of something called a Strengths Finder assessment you can do online. It helps you figure out what you're good at, because that's important. I know when I talked to my therapist, when I very first time I met him, this is way, way ago, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. He said, "Have you ever done a strengths test?" And I went, "What? I thought this was therapy, not the gym." He's like, no, mental, emotional skills. What are your strengths? And I told him, I have no idea. He says, write some down. I wrote down 10. He continued to add to the list another 30 things that he felt from the little bit he'd known about me and from other people were applicable to me. Now, I thought some of them were similar words, like synonyms, but he felt like they were separate and different. And I'm like, how could you find 40? I only found 10. He says, it's about belief. He has coached me over time. Therapy is kind of a coaching to see that I have, in fact, more skills and strengths than I thought, which I now embrace and utilize. But I didn't start out that way. And I feel like it was worth every penny. I'm not going to plug his business, but just FYI, sometimes you need to go and get help, whether it's a business coach, whether it's a therapist, maybe you're at the gym, you need a trainer. You can figure out where I'm going with that. So the idea is that you're helping your team member analyze their performance so they can better develop their skills. And that's sort of like what I'm trying to do today. I'm helping you see what the skills are and think about them so that you can better develop them. I can only do so much in 3 hours, but what you can take from this and run with is sort of the personal development that they're kind of implying here. So coach provides guidance, directing members towards their goal. They also provide advice, feedback on the work being accomplished in relation to the goal. The feedback can be offered anytime, but regular performance reviews, this is why, like, you know, if a business person, we're doing this class, are ideal for providing coaching and counseling. I know for a fact that at least one networking group I am in gives a 6-month review and then an annual review. And they ask a survey of the other members for feedback. The committee that kind of manages the organization will then say, hey, this person's getting kind of negative reviews on a couple of things. 1 or 2 of the membership committee would then be assigned to, for example, speak to me and say, we've been getting feedback about this. However, we feel like either A, it's fair, or no, it's not. And we'd like to make some suggestions on how to help you remedy this. It's not to sit there and lay blame. It's there to help someone overcome or get better at. Oh, it's BNI, Angela. I was trying not to be like too salesy and plug too many brand names. The networking group I'm in, there's accountability. And they do the 6-month review, not like going to fire you, but like to help you stay on target, because people pay good money to be part of this group. And they want people who are going to work and are motivated, self-motivated, and willing to do what they promised they were going to do. In this case, it's find business for each other. So if I go in and say, I'm going to help that chiropractor find more clients because I have so many friends in my life and people in my neighborhood who complain about back pain, and then I don't do it, people are going to be like, well, she's all talk. During the review, that might come up. And they might say, well, what are you doing to find clients like you promised? Do you need help finding clients for this person like you promised? If you would like, maybe I could partner with you to be your accountability buddy and check in with you to make sure that you stay on target for said goal that you promised. Like, that's the kind of thing they're talking about in this case, which actually kind of it's a good management. It actually is. I think it's important that if I were in an organization that was purely social, that it wasn't going to have a review and all that. But those are the ones, you know, I do on my own time, and they're just fun. That's what, you know, that's the difference between a networking group and a social group. So obviously I'd keep the two separate. I believe I'm on to the next slide here. Let's hope I don't jump ahead too far. Bear with me a second. So it says, turn to page 12 in your workbook and refer to the visual as you offer the explanation. So bear with me a second. I got to pull up what your page 12 looks like on coaching and have my visual in front of me. And I don't know why, but that image is not loading. There's more to this. Trust me. Let me see if, oh, it's one of those. You got to click it a few times for them to pop up. I'm going to make the little window with all the people go away so I can fully see the grid here. And I think, yeah, this is about midway down on page 12 in your workbook, where it talks about, question, does the person know performance can be improved? Yes or no? That's, where's the laser pointer on this thing? They actually use a laser pointer. Bear with me a second. Aha, yes, here we go. So this is the checkbox for yes, this is checkbox for no. So you're not really checking this off, but this is going on in your head. And I believe if I click, it'll advance the slide. Nope. There we go. I just got to keep my button straight. So then, of course, do you know what's expected of him and her? Does that person understand like their responsibilities and expectations? If not, then you need to, what's the word I'm looking for here? You need to kind of tell them, but gently. You're not going to yell at them. Pardon me. I'm just trying to keep track of here. So the top part of my page is the rest of this checklist. So I'm going to keep bringing it out. Are there obstacles to the performance? Yes or no? Again, if you know what they are, you have to identify them so that you can then figure out how to remove them. If the person understands, does this person know how to improve? Yes, then they should be able to of their own right. If not, they're going to need help. And that's the retrain part it's talking about. Could the person make improvements that if he or she wanted to? Again, that's partly it's the motivation, but it also might need you to consider, in this case, it says reassign, transfer, and remove. If that task was not assigned correctly, this is where the reassign part might apply. And of course, I'm going to just stop for a second because it's asking me to do the next slide. And I think I just wanted to read a little bit more of what's going on here, which is that whenever you coach or counsel a team member, consider some factors. One, the purpose. Only a coach or team member when necessary. If you're kind of berating them, that's not good. Do you want to strengthen them and motivate them to resolve things, if at all personally? You don't want to make a big drama out of it and embarrass them in front of the group. Oftentimes they might need reorientation. Some people have to go back for additional training. It would be the first time I've had that happen to me in certain situations in the lab where I didn't really know the task well enough. So they sent me back to retrain on the task before I continue forward with that particular responsibility. The right time. Timing is important. I think managers have to understand and know when to speak up. And again, it mentions here in private, not in public. You got to give them a chance to kind of say what they have to say to you without scrutiny in front of everyone else. I'm going to just turn the pointer off. They have to, you may have to intervene if the coaching is necessary, but if it isn't, maybe just a verbal is enough. Sometimes it's a matter of, you got to make sure that you're not grumpy and taking it out on them. Like, that is not okay. Not that you personally would do that, but in general, a good manager, if you're noticing that they've got a lot of life stuff going on and things are not going well right now, this maybe not the right time to turn around and coach the team because they're not equipped to handle with the emotions plus the responsibilities and the sensitivity needed to coach their team. So you got to kind of separate the two. That's why a lot of people say, don't take your work home with you. Same thing, don't bring your home to work, so to speak. Along those lines, be aware that there's certain times, just before lunch, at the end of the day, beginning of the day, beginning and end of the week, those are not good times to have coaching sessions. People's minds are somewhere else. Rightly so. They're either about to start their break, they're going to or from work, they're thinking about the next thing they're doing that has nothing to do at work. I get that. You're not going to have effective results if you try to coach someone in those time frames. And it says here, avoid setting up counseling sessions too far in advance. The team member is not going to have time to like build up anxiety if that's the kind of thing that happens to them. And of course, you know, the right place. We just talked about not in public. It should be done in a comfortable, non-threatening environment whenever possible. It is not something you just pull them aside and do in a meeting room. I think that personally would be a horrible idea, but I think sometimes that is exactly how someone handles a situation because maybe that's the only way. I'm gonna just stop the sharing for a minute so I can kind of keep an eye on you guys because it's hard to get your reactions. You're not in the same room with me. I was always trained on being able to see that my audience was still with me, if you know what I mean. I know we're getting close to our next break and I want to make sure I give you that chance, and I'm trying to figure out when to take it. I almost feel like right now would be good. Do I have a consensus? And maybe it would pick back up in a minute with the next visual and the next few bullet points. That way we're not like, I just feel like this is getting a little long and I want to make sure everyone has a chance to stretch or whatever they got to do. All right, then I'm going to pause. You guys are still on your workbook, pages 12 and 13. And we actually haven't started the exercise yet, just so you know. So I'm going to stop recording or pause recording and set a 5-minute timer for a quick stretch break. And then when we come back, I'll pick up where I left off with the next visual, which talks a little bit more about coaching, and then go into our, actually it's the second to last exercise, just to let you know we're almost through the bulk of this workshop, and I appreciate you guys for sticking around as long as you did. So I'm gonna pause, set a timer. I'll see you guys in about 5 minutes. So we mentioned, at least at some point, there was a bullet point that said, get agreement that the problem exists, discuss the problem, agree on actions, follow up, and recognize improvement. I think, just a second here. Yeah, I know. I couldn't have done this without the slides. Absolutely there. Thank you, Sandy, for the thoughts. I just want to make sure that I'm not glossing over something important. That's the only reason I had them in front of me like I do. So, long story short, coaching is not easy, but you can see it's an important part of management, and it's an essential part of management because yes, motivation is challenging and fun, but coaching is necessary. It's like two sides of the same coin. Every team member needs to have a coach to provide them guidance if necessary. Sometimes people talk about mentorship. It's a little different, but along the same lines. You might find that someone who guides you is also your mentor, but mentors and coaches are not one and the same. I do see a lot of overlap. The success of a manager will depend on how well they delegate and train, and of course, can't solve every problem. We're human beings. If we were perfect, well, we wouldn't be here in this workshop now, would we? Sometimes we might require managers to modify their own behavior, myself included, hence why I go through the training with Toastmasters to get better at what I do so I can turn around and help my team members in the same vein. Coaching is continuous. It doesn't just end. It can be important to facilitate when a goal needs to be accomplished. So that was basically the end of that slide. And the exercise, this is where I'm going to need you guys to be patient with me because it is designed to be a breakout session of groups of 3. Now I can see we have 6 people, somebody dropped off. However, I do not know if Veronica's back, and obviously Alan has chosen to stay muted and has camera off, which again, I can't make them turn it on. I can ask nicely. If it turns out we really are a group of 4 and we've lost those 2 and they're just watching, then I don't see the point in creating a breakout room to separate us. So if I can quickly get a consensus, is it okay to treat this room as if it were the breakout room and that what we're going to do together? I probably don't need to give you all 3 cases, but if you look at your workbook, you'll see on pages 13 and 14, there are 3 different examples. I think the idea was to have me assign each group 1 case, unless I'm reading this wrong. So bear with me just a moment as I set a timer, again, to keep us on target. In your workbook, I think on page 12, no, 13. Yeah, again, as I said, sometimes I think the page numbers in this thing did not get updated correctly. Appoint, this is why you need teams of 3. So we're going to just have to do this amongst ourselves. A manager, a team member, and an observer. So since I'm the host, you 3, Jim, Sandy, and Angela, are going to get to play these characters. And then Veronica and Alan, if they're there, great, they can watch. And if not, at least we won't be depending on them. And the idea is that you're going to get one of these case studies to read, and then the manager and team member are going to role play the situation. The coach should be using the coaching process discussed earlier to help the team member improve. The observer should answer the following questions. So they're taking notes as they're watching. How did the manager present the problem? Was he or she direct? How did the team member respond? Did he or she participate in the discussion? Another dot, did the team member agree or disagree with the coach or manager? And what was the result of this discussion? Was it resolved? If so, great. If not, why? So they're going to let you have 5 minutes of role play after reading. So I think I'm supposed to give you a few minutes to read, a few minutes to role play, and then we're going to use the remaining minutes to kind of discuss the situation. Does that make sense? Measuring performance, determining if and where deviations are occurring, and taking corrective action. So that's what we mean by control. We're looking to keep yourself on target. I don't know if you've ever heard of the, horrible, I just forgot the name of the book. But it's basically the concept of like the factor of 1, where all it takes is to be off by 1 degree. Over time, you become off course. So you need to keep making these little 1 degree course corrections as you're going along to keep yourself on target. So when I think of controlling, that's what I'm thinking of as course correction, if you will. So it's interesting that in this little blurb, it says taking corrective action. The basic purpose of control is to make sure plans and goals do in fact become accomplished. To do this, you need to measure. This is why we talked about measurable. This is why we talked about having benchmarks along the way. This is what plays into that. Have you ever tried to measure the length of a piece of wood without a ruler? The ruler serves as a standard. Now you can try using your hand. And your hand is a different length than another person's hand, so you can't say just it's 1 hand long. I mean, I know they measure horses in hands, but there's actually a unit of measure that's associated with that. They may have started out that way, but even the foot, I think it was based on somebody's actual foot length, a king of some kind, if I remember correctly. I don't know if that's true, but what we now call 12 inches was based on something else first. And when we started to have a unit system of measurement, like metric system versus standard versus other, but they all have a set number and you can convert because they don't change. So having something that's measurable, whatever that unit is important. So like the ruler serves as a standard, it's difficult to measure performance unless you had a standard against which to measure it. So standards are really imperative. I know when we talk in the laboratory about standards and or controls, again, the same word, control, we're talking about positive and negative control. So you're doing a test. You know that normally the result is blank. And so you have a sample of something that always gives that result. That is your positive control. Then you have something that does not yield that result all the time, never ever. It doesn't reveal anything else. It's actually completely a blank. It's a null, or your negative control. Every time you run a batch of this particular assay, 2 holes on that tray, because they have little wells in them, one has to be the negative and one has to be positive. Actually, they're duplicates. There's 2 negatives and 3 positives. Don't ask, it's a Red Cross thing. But the key is, if any of those controls fail, you have to do the test over, because it means that the rest of the test did not run according to standard and you can't trust your data. So what I'm saying in the long version is, having the standard to measure by allows you to determine if you're in fact on target or not, how far off target you are, and in which way. Because that's important for course correction. If you're in a boat and you need to go north and you've drifted, but you don't know if you've drifted east or west, how the heck are you going to know which way to steer back? That's kind of my analogy. I hope it works for you. It's a little less sciencey than the lab thing. So we talk about they give examples. We're not going to read them because I just gave you mine. Measuring performance against standards. I'm going to reset the timer because it tells me each segment has a time, and we finished early, so great. Measuring performance against standards. So once you've established what that standard is in your particular industry, I'm going to just stop share for a moment because I don't think we need to be staring at my slide all this time. You need to put in your checks. In the case of a data entry clerk, maybe each clerk should be entering 50 orders an hour. Sounds like one of those math problems from high school. If the data clerk puts in 50 orders an hour and this other data clerk puts in 70 orders an hour, you know, you can obviously tell someone's moving at a faster rate than the other. Maybe if one person's accuracy is higher than the other, that might play into whether or not they have to stop and redo things because, you know, if the other one's accuracy is poor, it's going to actually take longer because they have to go back and check their work or whatever it happens to be. So clear measurements aren't always possible. And that's just admitting the truth that life is funny and there's just sometimes no way to effectively state whether you're on target or not. But it's important to still have some sense of measurement. Again, that's why I think time sensitivity is important. Or as I said, if it's a financial goal, you know, a benchmark on the way to it, like a fundraiser where they have the thermometer, you may not hit the mark exactly at the same rate. You may hit a lot and then stop, slow down, and then speed back up again to get that last little bit in the last few hours. It's sometimes not as simple or straightforward like that. And it says it's important that these things are measured simply because it's giving an example of if you want to be profitable, this is a business example. In the short run, it could destroy your ability to survive in long run. Costs can be held down and profits can be short run by ignoring maintenance and employee welfare. So I guess what they're getting at is if things aren't maintained, they will not perform well. That is my interpretation of that statement because it was getting a little confusing. It's best to measure and compare only before important decision points. In other words, don't micromanage and analyze to the point of paralysis. And I think it's called analysis paralysis. If you overanalyze every little bit, you're never going to move forward. But you need those checkpoints. Like a video game. Save point, checkpoint, Mario Brothers. You know what I'm talking about? Like, you got to know at some point you have a progress report and a little flag goes up to tell you how well you did. Did you pass the level? I think that's sort of where that thought was going. And I'm going to move to our next slide now. Bear with me a moment. It's talking about correcting deviations. So that will be this guy. Again, you're analyzing the problem, determining what went wrong, deciding what to do, and then taking action. So I'm going to read a little bit into an example. The world is full of business examples of poor analysis, bad decisions, and effects on companies. You might remember when Coca-Cola released New Coke. This is going back a little bit, but I think all of us are old enough to remember this. It was a sweeter tasting drink that was supposed to replace its predecessor. When it made its debut, consumers were so outraged that the company decided to continue to make the drink with the old formula. The company probably conducted many tests before introducing this beverage, but it still obviously made a mistake. How can we as managers make the best decisions and be sure that all data has been considered? So I think what they're getting at is somebody missed something or did not interpret something as weighted as perhaps they should have. I can agree. There are times when I get a little blindsided when I'm looking at numbers or I bias my thoughts on, oh, we're never going to reach that. That's not doable. I'm guilty of that at least one point or another. So moving into slide 19, we're almost done. We have only one more exercise and we'll be wrapping up. Just so you know, I am watching the clock. One method to analyze problems is called force field analysis. This is a little new to me, so this is the area I'm weakest in, but the rest of the lecture I'm pretty solid on. What they're talking about is, and you can see the picture here, and it should be in your workbook on page 17. There's like 3 pages to this exercise, so bear with me as I keep them out where I can see them. I'm going to read this and then we'll hit the exercise. One of the things you have to think about is like the opposing forces. So some forces are called drivers that push your solution forward, and the others are restrainers that kind of set you back. Kind of reminds me of, what is it, life? Or is it Monopoly, where you can kind of get sent back and you have to start over, or you have to work your way back up to where you were. So that's just the image. It'll be available if you need it. I'm going to jump to the next slide. You have to define your problem. This could be the difference between what's currently happening and what should be happening. That's, of course, if you have an expected outcome or a standard to compare against. Now, do you see why we need standards? Because otherwise, it's kind of hard to define when you've hit a problem or not. You might be thinking it's smooth sailing and not realize that you are, of course. And of course, they are giving an example of having a minimum of 20 members in your Toastmasters Club, but your membership has dropped to 15 in the past month. This gap of actual membership to your goal is the problem that needs to be solved. That one hits a little close to home, huh? Doesn't it? At least to one of us. Define your objectives. Again, we kind of always seem to be having to write down and figure out exactly what we're going for. What do you hope to have happened when the problem is solved? In other words, how do you know it's been solved? Kind of like setting a mini goal. So you got to be specific, measurable, and achievable. Sound familiar? So you're just rinsing and repeating at this point. Identify your driving forces and restraining forces that contribute to the problem. So that would be, if we're doing the membership example, what is helping build your membership and what is causing it to just deteriorate or degrade? Maybe it's natural attrition. People have moved. They their schedule has changed. They no longer can come to the meeting. They pardon me, my watch is going off. They changed jobs and now they're just not available to go because they're working somewhere else and at a different time, and their commute has changed. Their kid just graduated high school and is going off to college, and they have all this other things that they need to manage instead of coming to the meeting because their time and attention has to be focused on their child as they go off to college. It could be anything. There are a lot of reasons why a membership of a club will drop, as an example given here. Those are your opposing forces. And of course, you need to think about what are the ones that push you back forward, like a membership drive or public relations, marketing, making some kind of an offer to get a group to come on board with a company, maybe their employees, they'll come after work or during their lunch break, depending on where you are or what your club location is and type of club. In case the non-Toastmasters don't know, there are private clubs that belong to companies and there are public community clubs. Those are kind of some of the limitations. But what pushes them forward, if you're a company club, is maybe HR offers some kind of reward if you get to a certain point in your Toastmasters training as acknowledgement of you bettering yourself as an employee, as an example. So when you've identified those driving and forces and restraining forces, you make your list, figure them out. You now need to develop a solution based on that information and see which ones are going to yield you the best results. The example they were talking about with the club meetings might be to make sure that they begin and end on time and conduct what's called the successful communication series, successful club series. It's basically some exercises the club does to become better at what they do so they can turn around and use those new skills to bring people along board. I'm not going to go into too much detail because not everyone in this room is a Toastmaster or would care about that. The long term is consider your strategy against your objectives. Will your problem solving strategy promote this? And they say in status quo. I hate that phrase. Basically, is it going to work? That's what they're looking for. You know what the problem is. You know what your best strengths are. You got a plan of attack, but will it work? And if so, what are you going to do to make it work? What are you going to do to reinforce those strengths to make it work? I think that is pretty much what that segment was talking about. So now I'm going to take 2 seconds to turn off the screen share, get back to you guys. Exercise 7, this is the last one. We are literally almost there. I know we're running a few minutes over, but I want to make sure that I give you everything I promised. And as I said, since it's recorded, if you have to step away, I understand. You can always watch those last few minutes later if necessary. So resetting the timer. Again, they want us to be in a group. We already are. I'm not needing a breakout room. And it's going to have me, again, appoint one person to take notes, if at all possible. And it's going to suggest for us to select, hold on, we got to find it first. I want to say it's page 16. There are several problems to choose from, so we need to select one. It could be a Toastmaster Club problem or a business problem. I don't know if you guys have a preference. This is where you can unmute if you want to, because it'll probably be easier for communication. And then we're going to use the steps 1 and 2 to analyze the situation as it is, status quo, define your objectives, figure out what your driving and restraining forces are, and then develop a strategy. So that's what the pages 16 and 17 are pointing to. And then there's yet another page, 18, but literally it's the last page in the workbook. And they talk about select 2 or 3 restrainers, English, from your list and outline a strategy for weakening. So they basically want you to drill down and figure out how to eradicate or overcome the problem. Finally, weigh your problem, meaning, will it work? So that's what those 3 pages in your workbook are relating to. I'm starting the timer just to keep me on time. Just it says here, goal setting, planning, implementing, controlling. These are those key components. I think they just summarize it one last time. Let me verify that is the last slide. These steps form a cycle that when completed simply begins again with the goal setting process. So here's a nice little quote, but I'm actually going to let me jump out of this for a second. This is what they're talking about, the cycle, one last time. So goal setting, planning, implementing, and controlling. That is your cycle. If that's all you take away from this whole workshop, those 4 things, you know, tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. This is me telling you what I told you. These are the 4 key components that once you get these mastered will make you more successful as a manager. As you can see, it takes time and effort, and most importantly, skill. But it's true, these things, these workshops, contests, company projects do in fact take time and effort, and you don't want to waste it. That is a valuable resource. So from the moment you step into a managerial position, your decisions and activities ultimately determine not only your success, but the success of each and every team member and the team itself, even the whole entire organization. So if you gather and get nothing else out of this, I hope that you get at least that little bit of understanding and can appreciate what I went through to present this workshop to you, in the hopes that it gives you something that you can take away and utilize in your everyday life and perhaps in your work and beyond. Thank you again for participating. I know 3 hours is a long time. I can understand how tough that is. I think we got, what, Jim, Kristen, and Veronica. We lost everyone else, and as I said, I'll send everyone a copy of the slides, copy of my notes, and the replay. It will take a few hours because I have to make some notes and edits myself, but I thank you all for participating. It really means a lot to me. I guess it's just you and me, Jim. I will probably end it a little sooner than this, but just since I have you on screen, I'm going to hit